The notification sound from my work phone cut through the silence of my apartment at 11:47 p.m. Another quality rejection notice. I squinted up the screen, my stomach already twisting into knots. Fabrication order number 4721, rejected. Multiple dimensional tolerances outside acceptable range. Rework required immediately. A. Thompson, quality manager. The same Amanda Thompson who used to ask me to help her with her homework? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The same Amanda who I taught how to use a micrometer when Dad first brought her to the shop during college breaks. My sister had found another problem with my work, and just like the past 3 weeks, it was somehow always my projects that failed her increasingly impossible standards. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling of my cramped one-bedroom apartment, listening to the hum of my ancient air conditioning unit struggling against the Arizona heat. 8 years I'd been at Thompson Manufacturing Solutions. 8 years of perfecting my craft, building relationships with clients, and earning the respect of every machinist and fabricator on that floor. I'd started as a shop apprentice right out of high school, while Amanda went off to Arizona State to study business management. I'd worked nights, weekends, and holidays to learn every machine, every process, every trick that could make the difference between a good part and a perfect one. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore, because Amanda had decided that my work wasn't good enough for the Thompson family standards. The irony wasn't lost on me that the parts she kept rejecting were going to some of our biggest aerospace clients, the same clients who had specifically requested me for their projects after years of flawless delivery. These weren't rookie mistakes she was catching. These were measurements that fell well within industry tolerances, parts that would pass inspection at any reputable facility in the country. But Amanda had her own vision of what quality meant, and somehow that vision only applied to work that came from my station. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. I was running the evening shift as senior fabricator, leading a team of 6 skilled workers who looked to me for guidance on the complex aerospace components that made up 60% of our business. Thompson Manufacturing had built its reputation on precision work, the kind of tight tolerance parts that required not just expensive equipment, but the experience to know when something was right just by the feel of the cut. Dad had started the company 25 years ago in a rented warehouse with 2 used machines and a dream of building something that would last. By the time I graduated high school, we'd grown into a 50,000 square foot facility with state-of-the-art CNC machines, quality measurement equipment, and contracts with some of the biggest names in aerospace and medical devices. I'd grown up in that shop, spending summers and weekends learning from Dad and the veteran machinists who became like uncles to me. There was something pure about the work, the satisfaction of taking raw aluminum or steel and transforming it into components that would eventually find their way into aircraft engines or life-saving medical equipment. Every part that left our facility carried a little piece of the pride we put into it, and I'd built my entire identity around being worthy of the Thompson name on the building. Amanda had taken a different path. While I was learning to read blueprints and mastering the art of precision measurement, she was studying business theory and management principles at the university. She'd graduated with honors and spent 2 years working for a large manufacturing corporation in California, gaining experience in what she called modern operational methodologies. When she announced she was coming back to Phoenix to join the family business, Dad had been thrilled. He'd always dreamed of having both his children working alongside him, building something together that could be passed down through generations. The transition had started smoothly enough. Amanda returned with impressive credentials and fresh ideas about efficiency improvements and process optimization. She spent her first month observing operations, asking thoughtful questions, and building relationships with the team. I'd genuinely been excited to work with her, imagining how we could combine her business acumen with my technical expertise to take Thompson Manufacturing to the next level. Dad had been practically glowing with pride, finally seeing his vision of a true family business coming together. The problems began when Dad announced Amanda's promotion to quality manager during our monthly all-hands meeting. Kevin Foster, who had been running quality control for 6 years, was being moved to operations manager, a lateral shift that everyone understood was really a demotion to make room for Amanda. Kevin had taken it professionally, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He'd been hoping for a promotion himself, and instead he was watching someone with no hands-on experience in our industry take over one of the most critical functions in the company.
Amanda's first day in quality control, she called a meeting with all the team leaders to discuss what she called elevated standards and accountability measures. She stood at the front of our conference room with a crisp new clipboard and a serious expression that reminded me uncomfortably of our mother when she was about to lecture us about cleaning our rooms. Her presentation was polished and professional, full of charts and graphs about statistical process control and Six Sigma methodologies. She talked about implementing new measurement protocols and establishing what she called zero tolerance policies for dimensional variance. Marcus Williams, our most experienced machinist, had raised his hand during the presentation. Amanda, I appreciate the focus on quality, but we're already running well within industry standards. Most of our clients are actually impressed with how tight our tolerances are compared to other shops. Marcus had 30 years of experience and had trained half the guys on our floor. If anyone understood what constituted quality work, it was him. Amanda smiled politely and made a note on her clipboard. I understand that's how things have been done, Marcus, but we're going to be raising the bar. Our family name is on this business, and I want to make sure every part that leaves here reflects the absolute highest standards possible. There was something in her tone that felt dismissive, as if Marcus's decades of experience meant nothing compared to her business degree and corporate background.
Started small. Amanda implemented new inspection procedures that added an extra layer of review to every job. Parts that had previously been approved by the floor supervisors now had to pass through her quality station, where she would check measurements using equipment that was calibrated to standards far tighter than what our clients actually required. She created new paperwork processes that documented every aspect of production, from setup times to tool selections to environmental conditions during machining. At first, the additional scrutiny seemed to apply equally across all workstations. Amanda would find minor issues with everyone's work, usually measurements that were still well within acceptable tolerances but didn't meet her new internal standards. She'd return parts for rework with detailed notes about what needed to be corrected, always maintaining a professional tone that made it difficult to argue with her assessments. The other team leaders grumbled about the additional time and paperwork, but everyone adjusted to the new reality. It was after the first month that I began to notice the pattern. While other workers occasionally had parts returned for minor adjustments, my work was being scrutinized with a level of detail that seemed excessive, even by Amanda's new standards. Jobs that I'd completed to the exact specifications provided by the client would come back with rejection notices citing dimensional variance measured to the thousandth of an inch. Parts that would have been considered exemplary under our previous quality system were suddenly inadequate under Amanda's microscope. The first time it happened, I assumed it was just bad luck. The aerospace industry demands incredibly tight tolerances, and even experienced machinists sometimes push the boundaries of what's achievable. I reworked the parts without complaint, double-checking my measurements and adjusting my process to account for Amanda's higher standards. The second time, I started to wonder if there was something wrong with my equipment. I spent an entire weekend recalibrating my machines and checking my measurement tools against certified standards. By the third rejection, I knew something else was going on. The part in question was a medical device component that I'd manufactured hundreds of times before. I'd measured it 3 different ways using 3 different instruments, and every measurement fell well within the specified tolerance range. When Amanda rejected it for being marginally outside acceptable parameters, I asked to see her measurements. She had used the same instruments I had, but somehow arrived at readings that were different from mine by amounts so small they fell within the measurement uncertainty of the equipment itself. That's when I started documenting everything. Every job I completed, I would measure multiple times using different instruments and photograph the results. I kept detailed notes about my process, the environmental conditions, and the specific tools used for each operation. It was extra work that cut into my efficiency, but I needed to protect myself against what was beginning to feel like targeted harassment disguised as quality control. The tension came to a head during a particularly challenging week when we were rushing to complete a large order for one of our biggest aerospace clients. The contract was worth nearly $200,000 and required delivery of precision components with tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. I'd been assigned the most critical parts, a recognition of my skill level that should have felt like an honor. Instead, it felt like Amanda was setting me up for failure.
I spent extra time on setup, triple checking my measurements, and running test pieces to ensure everything was perfect before beginning production. The first batch of parts came out beautifully, with measurements that were not just within tolerance, but clustered right around the nominal dimensions. I was proud of the work, confident that it represented some of the best precision manufacturing our shop had ever produced. Amanda's rejection notice arrived the next morning. According to her measurements, several of the parts were outside tolerance by amounts so small they would require specialized equipment to detect. She demanded that the entire batch be scrapped and reproduced, a decision that would cost us thousands of dollars in materials and labor while putting our delivery deadline at risk. I marched into her quality station with my documentation, determined to challenge her assessment. Amanda, I need to understand what's happening here. I've measured these parts 6 different ways, and they're all well within spec. Can you show me exactly what you're seeing? She looked up from her desk with an expression of patient condescension that immediately set my teeth on edge. Jake, I know this is frustrating, but quality control isn't negotiable. These parts don't meet our standards, and I can't approve them for shipment. But they do meet the client's standards, I insisted, spreading my measurement sheets across her desk. Look at these readings. Every dimension is within the specified tolerance range. The client would be completely satisfied with this work. Amanda glanced at my documentation dismissively. Our internal standards are higher than the minimum client requirements. Just because something meets the bare minimum doesn't mean that it represents the level of quality I expect from Thompson Manufacturing. There was something about the way she said, "I expect," that crystallized everything I'd been feeling. This wasn't about quality or standards or protecting the family reputation. This was about power, about Amanda establishing her authority by demonstrating that she could reject my work regardless of its actual quality. She was using her position to settle some kind of score that I didn't even understand. Amanda, this is ridiculous, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay professional. You're applying standards that don't exist anywhere else in the industry. These parts are perfect by any reasonable measure. Her expression hardened. I'm the quality manager, Jake. It's my job to determine what constitutes acceptable work, not yours. If you have a problem with my decisions, you're welcome to discuss it with Dad. The challenge was clear, and we both knew what it meant. I could escalate this to Dad, but that would force him to choose between his son who dedicated 8 years to building his business and his daughter who'd returned home with credentials and fresh ideas. Amanda was betting that Dad would support her authority as the quality manager, and she was probably right. I gathered up my paperwork and left her station without another word, but the damage was done. Amanda had made it clear that she intended to continue targeting my work, and there was nothing I could do about it without blowing up my family business.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Creating a family crisis that could tear apart everything Dad had built. I was trapped between my professional pride and my loyalty to the family business, and Amanda knew it. The next few weeks became a nightmare of constant scrutiny and impossible standards. Every job I completed was examined with microscopic attention to detail, and Amanda always found some reason to question the quality. Parts that would have been considered exemplary by industry standards were returned for minor adjustments that added hours to my workload and made it nearly impossible to maintain the productivity levels that had always been my strength. The other workers began to notice what was happening. Marcus started making subtle comments about the uneven application of quality standards. Kevin, despite his diplomatic nature, occasionally gave me looks of sympathy when Amanda issued another rejection notice. Even Dad seemed to sense that something wasn't right, though he remained reluctant to interfere with Amanda's management of her department. The stress was affecting every aspect of my life. I was working longer hours to compensate for the constant rework, staying late to fix problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. My apartment felt like a prison where I spent sleepless nights second-guessing every decision I'd made at work and dreading the next day's inevitable confrontations. I was beginning to question my own abilities,
wondering if maybe Amanda was right and my work really wasn't as good as I'd thought. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I couldn't continue working under these conditions, and I couldn't force Dad to choose between his children. There had to be another way forward. But first, I needed to document exactly what was happening and build a case that would speak for itself. Amanda might have the authority to reject my work, but she couldn't hide the truth forever. I started staying after hours to photograph rejected parts and compare them to approved work from other machinists. I documented measurement discrepancies and collected evidence of the double standards that Amanda was applying. It was meticulous work that consumed my evenings and weekends. But I knew that eventually the truth would matter more than office politics or family dynamics. What I didn't know was that Amanda was making her own plans, and the confrontation that would force everything into the open was only days away. Part 2. The False Dawn. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Thompson Manufacturing as I arrived for what I hoped would be a fresh start. It had been 3 days since my last confrontation with Amanda, and I'd spent the weekend recalibrating not just my machines, but my entire approach to the situation. Maybe I'd been too defensive, too quick to assume the worst about her motivations. After all, she was trying to establish herself in a new role, and perhaps her strict standards would ultimately benefit the company. Dad had called a morning meeting to discuss our upcoming contract with Meridian Aerospace, a deal that could potentially double our revenue over the next 2 years. As I walked through the production floor, I noticed the familiar sounds of the shop coming to life. The whir of CNC machines starting their morning cycles, the hiss of compressed air, and the steady rhythm of work that had become the soundtrack of my adult life. Marcus was already at his station, checking the setup for a complex titanium job, and he gave me a thumbs up as I passed. The conference room was buzzing with excitement when I arrived. Dad stood at the head of the table with the kind of energy I hadn't seen from him in months, surrounded by blueprints and contract documents. Kevin was reviewing production schedules with Patricia from HR, while Amanda sat quietly at the far end of the table, taking notes in her ever-present notebook. For a moment, it felt like the old days when we were all working toward the same goals. "All right, everyone, settle down," Dad began, his voice carrying the authority that had built this company from nothing. "I've got some incredible news to share. Meridian Aerospace has not only renewed our contract for the next 2 years, but they're expanding our scope to include their new engine component line. This represents a 300% increase in our business with them." The room erupted in excited murmurs. Meridian had been one of our most demanding clients, but also one of our most profitable. Their components required the kind of precision work that showcased our capabilities and justified premium pricing. Landing an expanded contract with them was validation of everything we'd built over the past 25 years. Dad continued, "The best part is, they specifically requested Jake to lead the technical side of this project. Apparently, the quality of his work on their previous orders made quite an impression with their engineering team." He looked directly at me with the kind of pride that made my chest swell with emotion. They want him to work directly with their design engineers on optimizing the manufacturing processes for the new components. I felt a surge of vindication that almost made me dizzy. After weeks of having my work questioned and criticized, here was objective proof from one of the most prestigious aerospace companies in the industry that my craftsmanship met their exacting standards. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a validation of the skills I'd spent 8 years developing under Dad's guidance. Amanda looked up from her notebook, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe even respect. "That's wonderful news," she said, and her tone seemed genuinely pleased. "Jake, I had no idea your work had made such an impression with them." Kevin jumped in with enthusiasm. "This makes perfect sense. Jake has been our go-to guy for the challenging aerospace work for years. His attention to detail and process control is exactly what Meridian values." Coming from Kevin, who'd been displaced from his quality role to make room for Amanda, this endorsement felt particularly meaningful. Dad spread out the new blueprints across the table, revealing component designs that were even more complex than anything we'd handled before. The tolerances were incredibly tight, with some dimensions specified to within half a thousandth of an inch. The materials included exotic alloys that required specialized tooling and precise temperature control during machining. It was the kind of project that would challenge every aspect of our capabilities. The timeline is aggressive, Dad explained, pointing to the delivery schedule. They need the first prototype run completed within 6 weeks, followed by full production starting in 2 months. Jake, you'll need to select your team carefully and make sure we have all the necessary tooling and equipment ready to go.
My mind was already racing through the manufacturing processes that would be required. Some of the geometries would push the limits of our current machines, requiring custom fixtures and specialized cutting tools. The inspection protocols alone would be incredibly complex, with multiple measurement points that would need to be verified at various stages of production. Amanda, Dad turned to my sister, I'll need you to work closely with Jake on developing the quality control procedures for this project. Meridian specifications are even more stringent than our usual aerospace work, so we'll need to be absolutely certain that every part meets their requirements. This was the moment I'd been hoping for. A chance to work collaboratively with Amanda on a project that mattered, where we could combine her systematic approach to quality with my technical expertise. Maybe the tensions of the past few weeks had been growing pains, and this project would give us the opportunity to find a productive working relationship. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to propose that we implement some additional quality checkpoints beyond what Meridian has specified. If we can exceed the requirements, it will demonstrate our commitment to excellence and potentially open doors for even more advanced projects. Her suggestion made sense from a business perspective, and I found myself nodding in agreement. That could work well, I said. If we document our process thoroughly and show that we're consistently delivering above their minimum standards, it could give us leverage for future contract negotiations. Dad beamed at the sight of his children working together on solving business challenges. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to take this company to the next level. I want you two to spend the next week developing a comprehensive plan for this project. Production schedules, quality protocols, resource requirements, everything. As the meeting broke up, Amanda approached me with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. Jake, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I know we've had some disagreements about quality standards lately, but I think this project could be a great chance for us to find an approach that works for both of us. Her words caught me off guard, but in a good way. Maybe I had been too quick to assume the worst about her intentions. I'd like that, I replied honestly. Your attention to detail and my technical knowledge could be a really powerful combination if we can find the right balance. We agreed to meet the following morning to begin planning the Meridian project, and for the first time in weeks, I left work feeling optimistic about the future. That evening, I found myself sketching out preliminary manufacturing sequences and making notes about potential challenges we'd need to address. The complexity of the project was daunting, but it was also exactly the kind of work that had drawn me to precision manufacturing in the first place. The next morning, Amanda was waiting in the conference room when I arrived, surrounded by quality manuals and measurement specifications. She'd clearly spent considerable time preparing for our collaboration, and her thoroughness was impressive. We spent the morning going through each component design, discussing the critical dimensions, and identifying the measurement points that would be most important for ensuring quality. I've been thinking about your suggestion regarding additional quality checkpoints, I said as we reviewed the most complex component. What if we implement in-process measurements at key stages, rather than just final inspection? That way, we can catch any issues early and make adjustments before we've invested too much time in a part that might not meet spec. Amanda's eyes lit up with interest. That's a great idea. We could create a digital record of each measurement point, building a complete quality history for every component. It would give us incredible traceability if Meridian ever has questions about our processes. For the first time since she'd taken over the quality department, we were having a productive technical conversation. Amanda's business background brought valuable perspectives on documentation and process control, while my manufacturing experience helped identify the practical challenges of implementing quality procedures on the shop floor. We spent the entire morning building what felt like a genuinely collaborative plan.
The breakthrough moment came when we were discussing measurement uncertainty and how to account for it in our quality protocols. You know, Amanda said thoughtfully, I think I may have been too rigid in some of my previous quality assessments. When you're measuring to tolerances that are close to the limits of our equipment accuracy, small variations in technique or environmental conditions can make parts appear to be out of spec when they're actually fine. I looked up from the blueprints, surprised by her admission. That's actually been one of my concerns with some of the recent rejections. When we're measuring to tolerances that are close to the limits of our equipment accuracy, small variations in technique or environmental conditions can make parts appear to be out of spec when they're actually fine. Amanda nodded slowly. I hadn't fully considered that aspect. My corporate experience was mostly with larger components where measurement uncertainty wasn't as significant. I think I need to recalibrate my approach to account for the realities of precision manufacturing. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd received from her, and it felt like a genuine acknowledgement that perhaps her standards had been unrealistic. I appreciate you saying that, and I want you to know that I do respect what you're trying to accomplish with quality control. Having high standards is important. We just need to make sure they're achievable and consistent. The rest of the week flew by as we developed a comprehensive plan for the Meridian project. Amanda proved to be an excellent project manager, organizing our ideas into clear documentation and creating timelines that balance thoroughness with efficiency. I handled the technical aspects of manufacturing planning, selecting the optimal cutting tools, and developing fixture designs that would ensure consistent part geometry. By Friday afternoon, we had created what I believed was the most detailed and well-thought-out production plan in Thompson Manufacturing's history. The quality protocols were rigorous but achievable. The manufacturing sequences were optimized for both efficiency and precision, and the documentation would provide Meridian with complete traceability for every component we produced. Dad reviewed our plan during a late afternoon meeting, and his reaction exceeded even my optimistic expectations. This is outstanding work, he said, flipping through our documentation. The level of detail and planning here is exactly what we need.
Handle this kind of advanced project. I'm impressed with how well you two work together. Amanda and I exchanged glances across the conference table, and for a moment, I saw the sister I'd grown up with, rather than the demanding quality manager who'd been making my life difficult. It really was a collaborative effort, she said. Jake's technical expertise was essential for understanding the manufacturing challenges, and I think we found a good balance between thorough quality control and practical implementation. That weekend, I felt more optimistic about work than I had in months. The Meridian project represented everything I'd been working toward: complex technical challenges, the opportunity to work with cutting-edge aerospace technology, and recognition from a prestigious client. Even better, it seemed like Amanda and I had found a way to work together productively, combining our different strengths to create something better than either of us could have achieved alone. I spent Saturday morning organizing my workspace and preparing for the intensive project ahead. The new tooling had arrived, and I took time to carefully inspect each cutting tool and fixture component. Everything would need to be perfect for this project, and I wanted to ensure that we started with the best possible foundation. Sunday afternoon, I decided to stop by the shop to run some preliminary tests on the new equipment. The facility was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC system, and I enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere as I set up test cuts on sample materials. The new carbide cutting tools performed beautifully, producing surface finishes that were even better than I'd expected. As I was cleaning up my test setup, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Amanda appeared in the doorway of the machining area, looking surprised to see me there. "I didn't expect anyone to be here today," she said. "Just wanted to double-check some measurements for our quality setup." "Same here," I replied. "I wanted to test the new tooling before we start production tomorrow. Everything's looking good so far." I showed her the test parts I'd machined, pointing out the excellent surface finish and dimensional accuracy we were achieving. Amanda examined the parts carefully, using her micrometer to verify the dimensions. "These look fantastic, Jake. If we can maintain this level of quality throughout the production run, Meridian's going to be very impressed."
As we talked about the technical details of the upcoming project, I felt a sense of partnership that had been missing since Amanda's return to the company. She asked thoughtful questions about the manufacturing process and offered suggestions for optimizing our quality documentation. It felt like we were finally working as a team toward common goals. Monday morning arrived with a sense of excitement and nervous energy. The Meridian project officially kicked off with a team meeting where Amanda and I presented our production plan to the entire shop floor. The response from the workers was enthusiastic, with everyone understanding that this project could secure the company's future for years to come. Marcus raised his hand during the presentation. This looks like challenging work, but exactly the kind of stuff we do best. When do we start cutting parts? This afternoon. We'll begin with the prototype runs, starting with the least complex components and working our way up to the most challenging ones. Amanda will be implementing real-time quality monitoring, so we'll know immediately if we encounter any issues. The first day of production went smoothly, with our quality metrics exceeding even our optimistic projections. The new measurement protocols that Amanda had developed provided excellent feedback on our processes, and the real-time monitoring allowed us to make minor adjustments that kept everything running perfectly. By the end of the week, we had completed the first phase of prototype components, and every single part met or exceeded Meridian's specifications. Amanda's quality reports documented our processes in detail, creating a comprehensive record that would be invaluable for future production runs. Dad was practically glowing with pride as he reviewed our progress reports. This is exactly what I envisioned when I dreamed of having both my children working in the business, he told us during our Friday wrap-up meeting. You're combining technical excellence with systematic quality control in a way that's going to set new standards for the entire industry. For 3 weeks, it felt like everything was falling into place. The Meridian project was progressing ahead of schedule, our quality metrics were consistently excellent, and Amanda and I had developed an effective working relationship that leveraged both of our strengths. I began to believe that we'd found a sustainable path forward, one where family dynamics and business operations could coexist productively. That optimism made what happened next even more devastating. Part 3. The antagonist. Introduction. The shift was subtle at first, so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. 3.5 weeks into the Meridian project, just as we were transitioning from prototype production to the full manufacturing run, Amanda's demeanor began to change in ways that were barely perceptible, but increasingly unsettling. It started with small things, a slightly sharper tone when discussing measurement discrepancies, a tendency to double-check my work more frequently than other team members, questions about my process decisions that felt more like challenges than collaborative discussions. The easy partnership we developed during project planning was slowly being replaced by something that felt more formal, more hierarchical. The first concrete sign that something had shifted came during a routine quality review meeting. We were examining the latest batch of prototype components, discussing minor adjustments to our manufacturing process based on feedback from Meridian's engineering team. The parts in question were well within specifications, but Meridian had suggested some optimizations that could improve their performance characteristics. "Jake," Amanda said, studying one of the components under magnification, "I'm seeing some tool marks on this surface that weren't present in our earlier production. Has something changed in your cutting parameters?" I leaned over to examine the part she was indicating. The surface finish was excellent by any reasonable standard, with tool marks so subtle they were barely visible even under magnification. More importantly, the finish quality was well within the specifications Meridian had provided.
Specification, but I'm wondering if we should be aiming higher. Remember, we discussed exceeding Meridian's minimum requirements to demonstrate our commitment to excellence. Her point wasn't unreasonable, but something about the way she phrased it felt different from our earlier collaborative discussions. There was an edge to her voice that suggested she'd already made up her mind about what needed to be changed, and she was simply informing me of her decision rather than discussing options together. "I can adjust the cutting speed slightly," I offered, but it will increase our cycle time and potentially affect our delivery schedule. Is the improvement significant enough to justify the trade-off? Amanda looked up from her notes with an expression that was politely professional, but somehow less warm than it had been in recent weeks. I think maintaining the highest possible quality standards should be our priority, even if it means making schedule adjustments. Our reputation depends on consistently delivering exceptional work. The phrase, our reputation, struck me as oddly possessive, as if Amanda was taking personal ownership of the company's quality standards in a way that excluded my own professional judgment. It was a subtle shift in language, but one that immediately put me on edge. Over the next few days, I noticed that Amanda was spending more time at my workstation than she had previously. While she maintained a professional demeanor, there was an intensity to her observations that felt different from the collaborative monitoring we'd established during the early phases of the project. She would stand just behind my shoulder as I worked, making notes about my techniques, and occasionally asking questions about decisions that I'd been making successfully for years. Jake, I notice you're using a slightly different approach to this drilling operation than what we documented in our process plan, she said during one particularly intrusive observation session. Can you walk me through your reasoning for the modification? I paused my work and turned to face her, trying to keep my tone even despite the growing irritation I felt at the constant scrutiny. The original approach was giving us some chatter in the drill holes, so I adjusted the feed rate and spindle speed to get a cleaner cut. The dimensional results are identical, but the surface finish is better. Amanda made more notes, her pen moving across the paper with quick, precise strokes. I appreciate the initiative, but I'd prefer that any process modifications be discussed with me before implementation. We need to maintain consistency across all production runs. Her request was technically reasonable from a quality control perspective, but it represented a significant departure from the collaborative approach we'd established. Throughout my career at Thompson Manufacturing, I'd been trusted to make real-time adjustments to optimize manufacturing processes. It was one of the skills that had made me valuable to the company and had earned recognition from clients like Meridian. Amanda, I said carefully, requiring approval for every minor process adjustment is going to slow down production significantly. Part of effective manufacturing is being able to respond to conditions as they develop. She looked up from her notebook with an expression that was pleasant but firm. I understand your perspective, Jake, but as quality manager, I need to ensure that all processes are properly documented and controlled. It's not about questioning your judgment, it's about maintaining systematic oversight. The conversation felt like a subtle power struggle disguised as a discussion about quality procedures. Amanda was asserting her authority over aspects of the manufacturing process that had traditionally been within the operator's discretion, and she was doing it in a way that made it difficult to object without appearing to resist legitimate quality control measures. The pattern continued and intensified over the following week. Amanda began requiring written justification for any deviation from the original process documentation, no matter how minor or clearly beneficial the change might be. She instituted daily quality reviews where she would examine my work with microscopic attention to detail, often identifying concerns that were so subtle they required specialized equipment to detect. I'm seeing some variation in the surface roughness across different parts in this batch, she announced during one such intrusive review session, pointing to measurements that differed by amounts well within normal manufacturing variation. The readings are all within specification, but the inconsistency suggests there might be process control issues we need to address. I studied the measurement data she'd compiled, noting that the variations she was concerned about were actually remarkably small for this type of manufacturing operation. Amanda, this level of variation is typical for manual machining operations. The parts are all well within the customer's requirements, and the variation doesn't affect functionality. She shook her head with the kind of patient determination that was becoming increasingly familiar. Jake, I know you have a lot of experience with this type of work, but I think we need to hold ourselves to higher standards. Just because something meets minimum requirements doesn't mean it represents the level of excellence our customers should expect from Thompson Manufacturing.
There was something in her phrasing that echoed conversations we'd had weeks earlier, but with a subtle shift in emphasis that made me uncomfortable. Where our previous discussions had been about we and us, she was now positioning herself as the guardian of company standards, with my role being that of a production worker who needed to be guided toward proper quality practices. The most troubling aspect of Amanda's evolving behavior was how difficult it was to object to. Every criticism she raised was technically valid. Every standard she imposed was defensible from a quality control perspective. She never raised her voice, never made personal attacks, never did anything that could be clearly identified as unreasonable behavior. Instead, she was gradually shifting the entire dynamic of our working relationship in ways that were subtle but unmistakably hierarchical. Marcus began to notice the change during our informal lunch conversations. Something seems different with Amanda lately. She's been asking a lot of detailed questions about your work processes. Everything okay between you two? I wasn't sure how to answer his question. Technically, everything was fine. Amanda was doing her job as quality manager, and I was doing mine as senior fabricator. But the easy collaboration we'd enjoyed during project planning had been replaced by something that felt more like supervision than partnership. She's just being
Thorough with the Meridian project, I replied, not entirely convincing myself. It's an important contract, so I understand why she wants to make sure everything is perfect. Marcus nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with my explanation. Just seems like she's spending a lot more time watching your work than anyone else's. Kevin mentioned that his team hasn't had nearly as much quality oversight. That observation hit home in a way that made my stomach tighten. I'd been so focused on Amanda's increasing scrutiny of my work that I hadn't really considered whether she was applying the same standards to other team members. If Marcus and Kevin were noticing a difference in treatment, it meant the disparity was becoming obvious to others in the shop. I decided to pay closer attention to Amanda's interactions with other workers over the next few days. What I observed confirmed my growing suspicions in ways that were both subtle and unmistakable. While Amanda certainly maintained quality oversight across all production areas, the intensity and frequency of her attention to my work was clearly disproportionate. When Marcus had a minor dimensional issue with one of his parts, Amanda reviewed his measurements, made suggestions for improvement, and moved on to other tasks. The entire interaction took perhaps 10 minutes and was conducted with the kind of professional courtesy that encouraged productive problem-solving. When I had a similar issue, a dimension that was within specification but closer to the tolerance limit than Amanda preferred, the review process extended to nearly an hour. She examined multiple parts from the same batch, questioned my cutting parameters in detail, required written documentation of my corrective actions, and scheduled a follow-up review to ensure the adjustments were effective. The disparity in treatment was becoming impossible to ignore, but it was also difficult to address directly. Amanda's attention to my work could be justified as appropriate oversight of the most critical components in the Meridian project. Her requests for additional documentation could be explained as necessary quality control for the company's most important contract. Every individual action she took was defensible, even if the overall pattern was clearly discriminatory. The situation came to a head during a production review meeting where Amanda presented quality metrics for the entire Meridian project. The data showed that all team members were consistently meeting or exceeding the required specifications, with overall quality levels that were remarkable for such complex manufacturing work. As you can see, Amanda explained to the assembled team, our quality performance has been excellent across all areas of production. However, I do want to highlight some opportunities for improvement in our processes. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed analysis of dimensional variation across different workstations. My station was highlighted in yellow, indicating what she described as areas requiring additional attention to process control. While all parts are meeting customer requirements, Station 3 is showing slightly higher variation in some critical dimensions. We'll be implementing enhanced monitoring procedures to address these process control issues. I stared at the data she was presenting, feeling a mixture of confusion and anger that I struggled to keep under control.
The variation she was highlighting was minimal and well within normal manufacturing limits. More importantly, the parts she was citing as problematic had all passed final inspection and been approved for shipment to Meridian. Amanda, I said, raising my hand to interrupt her presentation, can you clarify what specific issues you're identifying? The data shows that all parts from Station 3 are within specification. She turned to face me with an expression of polite patience that somehow managed to be both professional and condescending. You're absolutely right that all parts are within the customer's specifications, Jake, but as we've discussed, our internal standards are higher than minimum customer requirements. The variation I'm showing represents opportunities to tighten our process control even further. The room was silent as she spoke, and I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me as I processed her response. She was essentially criticizing my work for not meeting standards that she had unilaterally established, standards that went beyond what our customer required and what industry practice considered necessary. I understand the goal of continuous improvement, I replied carefully, but I'm concerned about implementing additional restrictions that might compromise our efficiency without providing meaningful benefits to the customer. Amanda smiled with the kind of professional warmth that felt more like a warning than genuine friendliness. I appreciate your perspective, Jake, but I think you'll find that pursuing excellence rather than adequacy ultimately benefits everyone. Our customers may not require these higher standards today, but they'll certainly appreciate them when they see the results. The exchange felt like a public challenge to my professional competence, delivered in language that made it difficult to respond without appearing to resist legitimate quality improvement efforts. Amanda had positioned herself as the advocate for excellence while implying that I was satisfied with mere adequacy. After the meeting, several of my colleagues approached me with expressions of confusion and support. "That seemed a little unfair," whispered Patricia from HR. "Your work has always been exceptional, and those quality metrics don't really show any problems." Kevin was more direct in his assessment. "I don't know what's going on between you and Amanda, but that presentation felt like she was trying to make you look bad for reasons that have nothing to do with actual quality issues." Their observations confirmed what I'd been feeling but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Amanda was using her position as quality manager to target my work specifically, applying standards and scrutiny that were clearly disproportionate to what she required from other team members. The collaborative partnership we'd enjoyed during project planning had been replaced by something that felt much more like systematic harassment. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to make sense of what was happening and what I should do about it. Amanda hadn't done anything that could be clearly identified as inappropriate. She was fulfilling her role as quality manager and could justify every action she had taken, but the cumulative effect of her behavior was creating a hostile work environment that was affecting my performance and professional reputation. I realized that I was facing a choice between accepting Amanda's increasing management of my work or confronting her behavior at risk of further damaging my professional reputation. Neither option felt attractive, but I knew I couldn't keep going on like this indefinitely.
Unreasonable standards or challenging her authority in ways that could create serious problems for the family business. Either option felt like a betrayal of the principles that had guided my career at Thompson Manufacturing. What I didn't yet understand was that Amanda's behavior was about to escalate far beyond subtle power plays and professional undermining. The sister I'd grown up with was disappearing entirely, being replaced by someone whose motives I was only beginning to comprehend. Part 4. The Pattern of Oppression. The transformation from subtle undermining to systematic oppression happened gradually, like water slowly eroding stone until the foundation crumbles without warning. 3 weeks after Amanda's presentation highlighting my process control issues, she implemented what she called enhanced quality assurance protocols that applied exclusively to my workstation. The protocols were presented as a pilot program designed to test new quality control methodologies before expanding them to other areas of production. On paper, being selected for the pilot program seemed like recognition of my importance to the company's most critical projects. In reality, it meant that every aspect of my work was now subject to levels of scrutiny and documentation that made normal production nearly impossible. Amanda required written justification for every tool selection, detailed measurements at multiple stages of each machining operation, and photographic documentation of work in progress that consumed more time than the actual manufacturing. The morning I received the pilot program notification, I found Amanda waiting at my workstation with a clipboard thick with new documentation forms and a digital camera for recording what she called process verification images. Her demeanor was professionally cheerful in a way that felt almost aggressive, as if she was daring me to object to requirements that she knew were unreasonable. "Good morning, Jake," she said brightly, arranging the new paperwork across my workbench. "I'm excited to get started with our enhanced quality protocols today. I think you'll find that the additional documentation actually helps improve process consistency once you get used to the routine." I studied the forms she'd prepared, noting requirements for measurements and documentation that would add at least 2 hours to every job I completed. "Amanda, this level of documentation is going to significantly impact my productivity. Are you sure this is necessary for parts that are already meeting all quality requirements?" Her smile remained fixed, but something in her eyes hardened, almost imperceptibly. "Jake, I know change can be challenging, but we need to think beyond just meeting minimum requirements. This pilot program is about establishing best practices that will position Thompson Manufacturing as the quality leader in our industry." The way she phrased her response made it clear that objecting to the new requirements would be interpreted as resistance to quality improvement rather than legitimate concerns about efficiency. She'd structured the situation so that any pushback on my part would seem unprofessional and contrary to the company's interests. "I understand the goal," I replied carefully, "but I'm concerned about meeting our delivery schedules if every part requires this level of documentation. Have you discussed the timeline implications with Dad?" Amanda's expression shifted slightly, taking on a tone of patient instruction that reminded me uncomfortably of the way she used to explain homework to me when we were children. "Dad is fully supportive of this initiative, Jake. He understands that short-term efficiency adjustments are worth making if they lead to long-term quality improvements. I'm sure you can adapt your processes to accommodate the new requirements." There was something in her phrasing that suggested she'd already discussed my concerns with Dad and positioned them as resistance to necessary improvements. The implication was that Dad was aware of the new protocols and had approved them, despite knowing they would affect my productivity. Over the following days, the enhanced quality protocols proved to be even more disruptive than I had anticipated. The measurement requirements forced me to stop my work every few minutes to document progress, breaking the rhythm and concentration that were essential for precision machining. The photographic documentation meant that Amanda could review every aspect of my process in detail, often identifying inconsistencies in my technique that had never affected the quality of my output. "Jake, I noticed in yesterday's photos that you're holding the micrometer slightly differently when measuring this dimension. Measurement technique consistency is important for maintaining reliable data." I looked up from the part I was machining, struggling to keep my frustration under control. "The measurement results are all within the required accuracy range, Amanda. Small variations in technique are normal as long as the readings are consistent." She made notes in her ever-present quality log, her expression suggesting my response confirmed concerns she'd already identified. "I understand that's how things have been done in the past, but we're trying to establish more rigorous standards now. Consistent technique leads to more reliable data, which ultimately benefits everyone." Her criticism of my measurement technique was particularly galling because I'd been the one who had trained her to use precision measurement equipment when she first started working in the shop during college breaks. The micrometer technique she was now questioning was the same one Dad had taught me, and it had served me well for 8 years of precision manufacturing.
The pattern of constant scrutiny and criticism began affecting my work in ways that created a self-fulfilling prophecy of quality problems. The stress of being watched and questioned constantly made it difficult to maintain the focus and confidence that precision work requires. I found myself second-guessing decisions that I would normally make automatically, leading to hesitation and inconsistency that Amanda was quick to document and critique. Jake, I am seeing more variation in your cutting parameters lately. Your feed rates and spindle speeds seem less consistent than they were in our earlier production runs. She was right, but what she didn't acknowledge was that the inconsistency was largely a result of the constant interruptions and documentation requirements she'd imposed. Every time I had to stop to take measurements and photographs, I lost the rhythm and intuitive feel that guided my best work. The enhanced quality protocols were more about controlling me than about improving quality, and Amanda was using them to create a self-fulfilling prophecy that I was incompetent and capable of meeting new standards. Every time I faltered or swerved from the prescribed process, she'd be there to document it and create a more compelling case that I wasn't capable of handling his technical duties.
We're creating the very problems they were supposedly designed to prevent. The most insidious aspect of Amanda's systematic oppression was how she used my own professional standards against me. Because I genuinely cared about producing quality work, her criticisms carried emotional weight, even when they were technically unfounded. She had an uncanny ability to identify aspects of my work that were perfectly acceptable by any reasonable standard, but could be improved with additional effort and time. This surface finish is within specification, she would say while examining a completed part, but I think you're capable of better. Your work used to be consistently exceptional, and lately it seems like you're settling for just meeting requirements. Comments like these were devastating because they contained just enough truth to be believable while ignoring the context that made them unfair. Yes, my work had been more consistent before Amanda implemented her enhanced protocols, but that was because I've been able to work without constant interruption and second-guessing. Her observation that I was settling for meeting requirements ignored the fact that meeting requirements was literally the definition of successful manufacturing. The psychological impact of Amanda's behavior extended far beyond the workplace. I found myself lying awake at night replaying conversations and wondering if her criticisms might be valid. Maybe I had become complacent in my work. Maybe my techniques really were inconsistent in ways that I hadn't noticed. Maybe Amanda's higher standards were necessary to maintain the company's reputation. The self-doubt was corrosive in ways that affected every aspect of my life. I began questioning not just my professional competence, but my value to the family business and my relationship with Dad. If Amanda was right about the quality of my work, what did that say about the 8 years I'd spent believing I was making meaningful contributions to Thompson Manufacturing? The breaking point in this phase of systematic oppression came during a particularly complex machining operation that required multiple setups and precision measurements. I was working on a critical component for the Meridian project, one that pushed the limits of our equipment capabilities and required every bit of skill and experience I'd developed over my career. Amanda positioned herself directly behind my workstation for the entire 4-hour operation, documenting every decision I made and frequently asking questions that forced me to explain techniques that had become second nature. The constant scrutiny made it nearly impossible to achieve the state of focused concentration that complex machining requires. "Jake, I need you to explain your reasoning for that depth of cut adjustment," she said, just as I was beginning a particularly delicate finishing pass. I stopped the machine and turned to face her, my patience finally reaching its limit. "Amanda, these constant interruptions are making it impossible to do precision work. This component requires continuous attention and feel for the cutting process. Every time you ask a question, I break my concentration and lose the feedback from the machine that tells me how the cut is progressing." Amanda's expression didn't change, but she made another note in her quality log before responding. "I understand that documentation can feel disruptive, Jake, but we need to maintain records of all critical decisions for quality traceability. If you're finding the questions distracting, maybe we need to discuss whether this level of precision work is still the best fit for your current capabilities." The suggestion that I might no longer be capable of handling precision work hit me like a physical blow. It was the kind of statement that questioned not just my current performance, but my entire professional identity.
Amanda had delivered it in a tone of concerned professionalism that made it difficult to respond with the anger I felt without appearing emotionally unstable. "My capabilities haven't changed, Amanda," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What's changed is the working environment. Precision machining requires focus and rhythm, both of which are disrupted by constant interruptions and questioning." She tilted her head slightly, adopting an expression of sympathetic consideration that somehow managed to feel more insulting than outright hostility. "I hear what you're saying, Jake, but I think we need to consider whether the real issue might be adaptability. The industry is moving toward more documented and controlled processes, and successful machinists need to be able to work effectively within those frameworks." Her response was a masterpiece of professional manipulation. She'd taken my legitimate complaint about disruptive working conditions and reframed it as a personal failing, my inability to adapt to modern manufacturing practices. The implication was that my resistance to her enhanced protocols reflected outdated thinking rather than practical concerns about productivity and quality. The conversation was overheard by several other workers, and I could see in their expressions a mixture of sympathy and confusion. They understood that something unfair was happening, but Amanda's professional language and apparent reasonableness made it difficult to identify exactly what was wrong with her behavior. Marcus approached me during lunch break with a concerned expression. "Jake, I don't know what's going on between you and Amanda, but that conversation this morning seemed pretty harsh. Are you okay?" I appreciated his support, but I wasn't sure how to explain what was happening without sounding paranoid or unprofessional. "She's implementing new quality procedures that are making it difficult to work efficiently. I'm trying to find a way to address it constructively." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Man, I've been watching this situation develop, and it seems like she's holding you to completely different standards than the rest of us. Kevin and I were talking about it yesterday, and we can't figure out what's driving it." The fact that other experienced workers were noticing the disparity in treatment was both validating and concerning. It meant I wasn't imagining the unfairness, but it also suggested that Amanda's behavior was becoming obvious enough to damage team morale and create divisions within the workforce. "I'm hoping we can work it out," I replied, though privately I was beginning to doubt that Amanda had any interest in finding a reasonable solution. Her behavior seemed driven by motivations that went far beyond legitimate quality concerns. The afternoon brought a new level of systematic harassment disguised as quality improvement. Amanda instituted what she called real-time process coaching, which meant she would provide running commentary on my techniques while I worked, offering suggestions for improvement that disrupted my concentration.
Undermined my confidence. "You might want to consider reducing that feed rate slightly," she would say, just as I was establishing a good cutting rhythm. "And I think your tool angle could be optimized for better surface finish." Each suggestion was technically reasonable, but completely unnecessary given that my results were consistently meeting or exceeding all requirements. The constant stream of coaching created a dynamic where I was working under supervision like an apprentice rather than functioning as the experienced senior fabricator I'd become over 8 years of dedicated service. The cumulative effect of Amanda's behavior was beginning to show in my work output. The enhanced documentation requirements, constant interruptions, and psychological pressure were reducing my productivity by nearly 30% compared to my normal efficiency levels. Parts that I could normally complete in a day were taking a day and a half, putting pressure on project schedules and creating additional stress for the entire team. During a production review meeting at the end of that week, Amanda presented data showing the productivity decline, but attributed it to what she called process optimization challenges during the transition to enhanced quality protocols. She made no mention of the role that her own requirements and interventions had played in creating the problems she was documenting. "As we can see from the productivity metrics," she explained to Dad and the rest of the management team, "Station 3 is experiencing some adjustment difficulties with our new quality procedures. This is not uncommon during transitions to more rigorous documentation requirements, but we'll need to monitor the situation closely to ensure it doesn't impact our delivery commitments." I sat in stunned silence as she presented my reduced productivity as a performance issue rather than the predictable result of her systematically disruptive oversight. She'd created working conditions that made normal efficiency impossible, then documented the resulting problems as evidence that additional supervision and process control were necessary. Dad looked at the productivity data with obvious concern. Jake, is there anything we can do to help you adapt to the new procedures more effectively? This project is too important for us to fall behind schedule. The question put me in an impossible position. I could explain that Amanda's requirements were unreasonable and counterproductive, but doing so would create a direct conflict between his children that could damage both family relationships and business operations. Alternatively, I could accept responsibility for the productivity problems and try to work within Amanda's system, but that would validate her approach and likely lead to even more restrictive oversight. I'm still learning to work efficiently within the new documentation requirements, I replied carefully. I think some adjustments to the procedures might help optimize the balance between quality control and productivity. Amanda responded before Dad could ask for clarification about what adjustments I might suggest. I appreciate Jake's willingness to adapt, but I think we need to be careful about compromising the integrity of our quality systems for the sake of short-term efficiency gains. The documentation requirements exist for important reasons, and we shouldn't abandon them just because they require some adjustment time. Her response positioned my suggestion for reasonable modifications as an attempt to compromise quality standards, making it politically impossible for Dad to support changes to her procedures. She'd effectively boxed me into a situation where any objection to her methods could be characterized as resistance to quality improvement. The meeting concluded with Dad expressing confidence that I would adapt to the new procedures and return to my normal productivity levels. Amanda volunteered to provide additional coaching and support to help me through the transition, an offer that filled me with dread because I knew it meant even more intensive oversight and criticism. Over the weekend, I found myself reviewing every aspect of my career at Thompson Manufacturing, trying to understand how a situation that had started with such promise had deteriorated so completely. The Meridian project was still technically successful. All our parts were meeting customer requirements and delivery schedules were being maintained despite my reduced productivity. But the working environment had become so toxic that I was dreading each day at the shop. The most troubling aspect of the situation was how isolated I felt. Amanda's professional demeanor and apparent reasonableness made it difficult to explain to others why her behavior was problematic. On the surface, she was a conscientious quality manager working to improve company standards and help a struggling employee adapt to new requirements. The reality that she was systematically undermining my confidence in creating impossible working conditions was much harder to communicate and prove. Monday morning brought a new escalation in Amanda's campaign of oppressive oversight. She announced that she would be implementing mentorship sessions, where she would work directly alongside me during complex operations, providing guidance and ensuring that all quality procedures were followed correctly. I think this hands-on approach will be much more effective than trying to coach from a distance, she explained, as she set up a chair directly next to my workstation. This way, I can provide real-time feedback and we can address any technique issues immediately. The prospect of having Amanda sitting beside me throughout entire machining operations was almost unbearable. Her previous oversight had been disruptive enough, but having her as a constant physical presence would make any kind of focused work impossible. I would essentially be performing under direct supervision like a probationary employee, rather than the senior fabricator I'd worked 8 years to become. Amanda, I really think the mentorship approach might be counterproductive, I said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite my growing desperation. Precision machining requires a lot of individual judgment and feel for the process. Having someone coaching continuously could interfere with developing that intuitive understanding. She smiled with the kind of patience that teachers show to students who are struggling with basic concepts. Jake, I understand that change can be uncomfortable, but sometimes we need to step back and rebuild our foundation before we can move forward. Think of this as an opportunity to refine your techniques with the benefit of fresh perspective. Her characterization of my 8 years of experience as a foundation that needed to be rebuilt was so insulting that I struggled to respond without losing my composure entirely.
Treating me like a novice who needed basic instruction, ignoring the fact that my work had consistently met or exceeded all quality standards throughout my career. The first mentorship session was every bit as awful as I'd anticipated. Amanda positioned herself where she could observe every movement I made, providing a constant stream of commentary and suggestions that made concentration impossible. She questioned every decision, from tool selection to cutting parameters to measurement techniques, treating each choice as an opportunity for improvement rather than recognizing that my methods had been proven effective over years of successful work. I think you could get a better finish if you adjusted your approach angle slightly, she would say during delicate operations that required complete attention. And have you considered using a different coolant flow rate for this material? Each suggestion required me to stop what I was doing, consider her recommendation, and either implement the change or explain why my current approach was preferable. The constant interruptions made it impossible to develop the rhythm and flow that precision work requires, leading to hesitation and uncertainty that actually reduced the quality of my output. By the end of the first day of mentorship sessions, I was emotionally and physically exhausted in ways that 8 hours of normal machining work had never made me feel. The psychological stress of working under constant criticism and supervision was more draining than any physical labor I'd ever experienced. Amanda, however, seemed energized by the experience. "I think today went really well, Jake," she said as we cleaned up the workstation. "I can already see some areas where your techniques can be refined. With a few more sessions like this, I think we can get your consistency back to where it needs to be." Her assumption that my techniques needed refining and my consistency needed improvement was based on problems that existed only because of her own disruptive oversight. She'd created the very issue she was now claiming to address, establishing a cycle of interference and criticism that justified increasingly intensive supervision. That evening, I sat in my apartment feeling more demoralized than I'd ever felt in my professional life. Amanda had systematically undermined my confidence, questioned my competence, and created working conditions that made normal performance impossible. Yet she'd done it all in the name of quality improvement and professional development, making it nearly impossible to challenge her methods without appearing to resist legitimate management oversight. The realization that she was my sister made the situation even more painful. This wasn't just professional harassment from a demanding supervisor. It was personal betrayal from someone who had grown up with me, who knew exactly how much my work meant to my sense of identity and self-worth. Amanda understood better than anyone how devastating her criticism would be, and she was using that knowledge to maximum effect. I began to understand that this wasn't really about quality control or process improvement. Amanda was using her position as quality manager to establish dominance and control, demonstrating that she had the power to make my professional life miserable, regardless of the actual quality of my work. The enhanced protocols, mentorship sessions, and constant criticism were tools of oppression disguised as management techniques. The next morning brought even more intensive oversight as Amanda expanded her mentorship approach to include what she called collaborative problem-solving sessions. These involved her working directly with me on planning each operation, questioning my process decisions before I could implement them, and requiring detailed explanations for approaches that I'd been using successfully for years. "Let's walk through your setup procedure step by step," she would say at the beginning of each job. "I want to understand your reasoning for each decision so we can identify opportunities for optimization." The collaborative sessions were particularly insidious because they appeared to be inclusive and educational, while actually being exercises in undermining my professional autonomy. Amanda would question every choice I made, suggest alternatives that might theoretically be better, and create doubt about approaches that had proven effective over years of practice. The most damaging aspect of her behavior was how it affected my relationship with other workers. My colleagues could see that I was struggling under Amanda's intensive oversight, but they couldn't fully understand why. Some began to wonder if there might be legitimate quality issues with my work that justified the additional supervision.
Others felt uncomfortable with the obvious tension but weren't sure how to respond or offer support. Marcus tried to provide encouragement during our lunch break conversations, but even he seemed uncertain about what was really happening. I know Amanda's being pretty tough on you, but maybe she's just trying to help you get back to your best work, he suggested tentatively. The implication that I needed to get back to my best work was painful because it accepted Amanda's premise that my performance had declined and required improvement. Even supportive colleagues were beginning to internalize the narrative that Amanda had constructed about my competence and professionalism. By the end of the second week of mentorship sessions, I was beginning to crack under the psychological pressure. The constant criticism and supervision had created a state of chronic anxiety that made it difficult to sleep, eat, or concentrate on anything other than work-related stress. I found myself obsessing over minor details and second-guessing decisions that I'd normally make confidently and automatically. The stress was also beginning to affect my physical health. I developed tension headaches that lasted for days, muscle knots in my shoulders and neck from the constant state of alertness and defensiveness, and digestive problems that made it difficult to eat regular meals. The workplace environment that Amanda had created was literally making me sick. Amanda, meanwhile, seemed thriving on the dynamic she had established. She approached each mentorship session with apparent enthusiasm, always ready with new suggestions for improvement and additional areas for development. Her energy and confidence stood in stark contrast to my growing exhaustion and demoralization, creating a dynamic that made her appear competent and professional while positioning me as the problematic employee who required intensive management. The breaking point was approaching rapidly, though I didn't yet realize how devastating the final confrontation would be.
My confidence isolated me from colleagues and created working conditions that made normal performance impossible. But she wasn't finished with her campaign of professional destruction. The worst was yet to come. Part 5. The failed resistance. The decision to push back against Amanda's systematic harassment came during a particularly humiliating mentorship session where she questioned my competence in front of 2 new apprentices who had been assigned to observe advanced manufacturing techniques. Having junior employees witness Amanda's constant criticism and correction of my work felt like a deliberate attempt to undermine my standing as a senior fabricator and damage my reputation within the company. "Jake, I think this is a good opportunity to demonstrate proper measurement technique," Amanda announced to the apprentices as I prepared to check dimensions on a complex aerospace component. "Notice how inconsistent hand positioning can affect measurement accuracy and lead to unreliable data." She was referring to natural variations in how I held the micrometer. Differences so subtle they had no impact on measurement accuracy, but provided her with opportunities for public criticism. The apprentices watched with uncomfortable expressions as Amanda demonstrated what she called proper technique, making it clear that my approach was somehow deficient and required correction. "Amanda," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "my measurement technique has been consistent for 8 years and has never resulted in quality issues. These apprentices don't need to see experienced workers being treated like beginners." Her smile remained professionally pleasant, but something cold flashed in her eyes. "Jake, I understand that feedback can sometimes feel personal, but we're all here to learn and improve. Even experienced workers can benefit from refining their techniques, especially when we're trying to establish higher standards." The exchange was witnessed by the apprentices, who looked embarrassed by the obvious tension between us. They could sense that something inappropriate was happening, but Amanda's reasonable tone and educational framing made it difficult for them to understand exactly what was wrong with the situation. That afternoon, I made the decision that I should have made weeks earlier. I requested a private meeting with Gad to discuss the working conditions that Amanda had created and the impact they were having on my productivity and morale. It was a conversation I'd been avoiding because I knew it would force Dad to choose sides between his children, but the situation had become unbearable.
Dad's office felt different when I entered for what I hoped would be a productive discussion about workplace dynamics. The familiar space where I'd received recognition and encouragement throughout my career now felt formal and intimidating, as if I was an employee requesting an audience with management, rather than a son seeking support from his father. Dad, I need to talk to you about some concerns I have regarding the quality control procedures Amanda has implemented. I began carefully, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the emotional weight of the conversation. I think some adjustments might be necessary to maintain both quality standards and productive efficiency. He leaned back in his chair with an expression that was attentive, but somehow guarded, as if he'd been expecting this conversation and had already formed preliminary opinions about its content. I'm listening, Jake. What specific concerns do you have? I spent the next 20 minutes explaining the enhanced protocols, mentorship sessions, and constant supervision that had made normal work impossible. I tried to focus on objective impacts, like reduced productivity and increased stress levels, rather than emotional reactions like feeling harassed and undermined. Throughout my explanation, Dad listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes, but giving no indication of his thoughts about what I was describing. I understand that Amanda is trying to improve quality standards, I concluded, but I think the current approach is creating more problems than it solves. I'm hoping we can find a way to maintain rigorous quality control without the level of oversight that's currently making efficient work impossible. Dad was quiet for a long moment after I finished speaking, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. When he finally responded, his tone was measured and diplomatic in a way that immediately made me nervous about what he was going to say. Jake, I appreciate you bringing these concerns to me directly rather than letting them fester. I can see that you're frustrated with some of the changes Amanda has implemented, and I want to make sure we address any legitimate issues. The phrase legitimate issues suggested that he was already questioning whether my concerns were valid or simply resistance to necessary improvements. It was the kind of language that positioned my complaints as potentially unreasonable rather than obviously justified responses to inappropriate treatment. However, he continued, I also need to consider Amanda's perspective on these procedures. She's been documenting some consistency issues with your work that she believes require additional oversight. From her standpoint, the enhanced protocols are necessary quality control measures, not harassment. My heart sank as I realized that Amanda had already presented her version of events to Dad, framing her systematic oppression as legitimate quality management and my reduced performance as evidence that additional supervision was necessary. Dad, the consistency issues she's documenting are largely caused by the disruptive oversight itself. When someone is constantly interrupting your work to question techniques and suggest improvements, it becomes impossible to maintain the focus and rhythm that precision work requires. He nodded with what appeared to be understanding, but his response suggested that he was more inclined to accept Amanda's assessment than mine. I hear what you're saying, Jake, but I also have to trust Amanda's professional judgment about quality control procedures. She has management training and fresh perspectives on industry best practices that might be valuable for improving our operations. The implication was clear. Amanda's business education and corporate experience made her opinions about quality management more credible than my 8 years of hands-on manufacturing experience. Dad was choosing to support her authority as quality manager, even when that authority was being used in ways that were out of line with corporate guidelines.
Were clearly unfair and counterproductive. I'm not questioning her qualifications, I replied, fighting to maintain composure as I felt the conversation slipping away from me. I'm questioning whether the specific procedures she's implemented are appropriate for the type of work we do and the experience level of the people doing it. Dad's expression became slightly more formal, taking on the tone he used when delivering difficult management decisions. Jake, I think the real issue here might be that you're having trouble adapting to changes in how we operate. Amanda's procedures might feel different from what you're used to, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. His characterization of my concerns as adaptation problems rather than legitimate complaints about inappropriate treatment was devastating. He'd essentially dismissed everything I'd explained about Amanda's behavior and reframed it as my personal failure to adjust to new management approaches. I've been adapting to changes in this company for 8 years, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've learned new equipment, new processes, new customer requirements, and new quality standards without any problems. What Amanda is doing isn't change management, it's systematic harassment disguised as quality control. The word harassment seemed to trigger something in Dad's demeanor. His expression hardened and his tone became more authoritative, as if I'd crossed a line by making such a serious allegation against his daughter and quality manager. That's a very serious allegation, Jake, and I don't think it's supported by the facts as I understand them, he said firmly. Amanda has been documenting quality issues and implementing procedures designed to address them. If you're calling that harassment, I think you need to reconsider your perspective on what constitutes appropriate management oversight. I realized in that moment that I'd lost the argument before it began. Amanda had successfully positioned herself as the professional manager dealing with quality issues while painting me as the problematic employee who was resisting necessary oversight. Dad's loyalty as a father was being overridden by his confidence in Amanda's business credentials and his desire to support the management structure he'd established. Dad, I've had no quality issues before Amanda took over the department, I said in a final attempt to make him understand. My work has consistently met or exceeded all requirements for 8 years. The problems she's documenting started appearing only after she began implementing her enhanced protocols. His response crushed any remaining hope I had for a reasonable resolution. Jake, sometimes fresh eyes can identify issues that become invisible when you're too close to the work. Amanda's outside perspective might be catching problems that we've been overlooking. I think you should view her oversight as an opportunity for professional development rather than personal criticism. The meeting concluded with Dad expressing confidence that Amanda and I would work out our differences and find a productive collaborative relationship. He suggested that I approach the situation with more openness to feedback and willingness to adapt to new quality standards. There was no acknowledgement that Amanda's behavior might be inappropriate and no indication that he was willing to modify or restrict her authority over my work. Walking out of Dad's office, I felt more isolated and defeated than at any point in my career. The person I'd counted on to provide fairness and support had instead validated Amanda's systematic oppression by accepting her characterization of events and dismissing my concerns as adaptation problems. I was truly on my own in dealing with workplace harassment that was being sanctioned by company leadership. The news of my unsuccessful meeting with Dad spread quickly through the shop, though I never discussed the details with anyone. Amanda's demeanor toward me became noticeably more confident and assertive, as if she'd received confirmation that her approach had management support and she was free to continue or even intensify her oppressive oversight. I hope your conversation with Dad was helpful, she said with false concern the morning after my meeting. I know he's very supportive of our quality improvement initiatives, and I'm sure he helped you understand why these procedures are necessary. Her comment made it clear that she knew about my complaint and was confident that Dad had sided with her. The smug satisfaction in her voice suggested that she viewed my failed resistance as validation of her authority and proof that she could continue her campaign of harassment without interference. The psychological impact of Dad's rejection of my concerns was devastating in ways that went far beyond workplace dynamics. I'd always believed that fairness and competence would be recognized and rewarded at Thompson Manufacturing, and that family relationships would provide an additional layer of protection against unfair treatment. Discovering that neither was true shattered fundamental assumptions about both my professional environment and my family dynamics.
Over the following days, Amanda's behavior became even more oppressive, as if my failed resistance had convinced her that she could escalate her harassment without consequences. She extended her mentorship sessions to cover entire shifts, implemented additional documentation requirements that consumed more time than actual manufacturing, and began questioning not just my techniques, but my professional judgment and decision-making abilities. Jake, I'm concerned that you might be losing confidence in your abilities, she said during one particularly brutal session where she'd criticized virtually every aspect of my work. Precision manufacturing requires mental clarity and self-assurance, and I'm sensing some hesitation in your approach that wasn't there before. Her observation was accurate, but completely ignored the role that her own systematic undermining had played in destroying my confidence. She created the very problems she was now documenting, then used those problems as justification for even more intensive oversight and criticism. The other workers began to distance themselves from me as it became clear that I was under some kind of management scrutiny that made association with me potentially problematic for their own careers. Marcus still offered occasional words of support, but even he seemed uncertain about what was happening and reluctant to become too involved in what appeared to be a management issue. The isolation was crushing. I'd always been well respected by my colleagues and had enjoyed positive relationships throughout the shop. Watching those
Relationships deteriorated as Amanda's campaign of harassment made me appear to be a problem employee was almost more painful than the direct attacks on my competence and professionalism. 3 weeks after my unsuccessful meeting with Dad, Amanda announced that she was implementing what she called performance improvement planning for my workstation. The plan included specific targets for productivity and quality metrics, regular progress reviews, and additional training on topics that I'd mastered years earlier. I want to make sure we're providing you with all the support you need to get back to your previous performance levels, she explained as she presented the improvement plan. These structured goals and regular check-ins should help you regain the consistency and confidence that seem to have been affected by the transition to our enhanced quality protocols. The performance improvement plan was the final humiliation in her systematic campaign to destroy my professional standing. It officially documented me as a substandard employee who required remedial assistance and close supervision, creating a permanent record that would justify any future disciplinary actions she might choose to take. I realized that Amanda had successfully maneuvered me into an impossible position. I could accept the performance improvement plan and the official designation as a problem employee, essentially validating her assessment of my competence and giving her permanent authority over my work. Alternatively, I could refuse to participate in the plan and face disciplinary action for insubordination and failure to cooperate with management directives. Either choice represented a complete victory for Amanda and total defeat for me. She'd used her position as quality manager to systematically destroy my confidence, isolate me from colleagues, and create official documentation that portrayed me as an inadequate employee who required intensive management oversight. The brother who'd worked for 8 years to build a career at Thompson Manufacturing had been transformed into a liability who needed remediation and control. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the performance improvement plan Amanda had presented, realizing that my career at Thompson Manufacturing was effectively over. I could continue working under her oppressive oversight, accepting the role of problem employee and enduring whatever additional harassment she chose to implement. Or I could leave the company I'd helped build and start over somewhere else, abandoning 8 years of experience and relationships along with any hope of eventually inheriting a role in the family business. Neither option felt like something I could live with. But as I would soon discover, Amanda wasn't finished with her campaign of systematic destruction. The worst was yet to come. And when it arrived, it would force me to make choices I'd never imagined I would face.
Me as an inexperienced worker, requiring constant guidance and correction. Jake, I need you to slow down and think more carefully about your tool selection, she announced during a routine drilling operation that I'd performed thousands of times without incident. I'm seeing some inconsistency in your approach that suggests you might be rushing through the decision-making process. Her comment was delivered with the kind of patient authority that supervisors use when correcting apprentices who haven't yet learned proper procedures. The implication was clear to anyone listening. I was someone who needed basic instruction and couldn't be trusted to make appropriate technical decisions independently. Through the conference room glass, I could see the Meridian executives occasionally glancing in our direction, observing what appeared to be a quality manager providing guidance to a machinist. From their perspective, Amanda's behavior would seem like evidence of thorough oversight and commitment to excellence. They had no way of knowing that her criticism was both unnecessary and deliberately humiliating. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine measurement verification process. I was checking dimensions on a complex aerospace component that represented some of my finest work. Every measurement was well within specification, and the surface finish was exceptional by any reasonable standard. It was exactly the kind of part that had earned recognition from Meridian in the past and demonstrated Thomson Manufacturing's capabilities. Amanda examined the part with her micrometer, taking her time to measure each critical dimension, while I stood beside her waiting for approval to continue with the next operation. The Meridian executives had moved closer to observe our quality control procedures, clearly interested in seeing how we verified dimensional accuracy on their components. "Jake," Amanda said loudly enough for everyone in the area to hear clearly, "this part is going to need to be scrapped and remade. The dimensions are outside our acceptable tolerance range, and the surface finish shows clear evidence of improper cutting parameters." I stared at her in complete shock, unable to process what she had just said. The part she was rejecting was objectively excellent work that met every specification Meridian had provided. Her claim that it was outside tolerance was not just wrong, it was deliberately false, a lie told in front of our most important client to publicly humiliate me and demonstrate her authority. "Amanda, that's not accurate," I said, my voice rising with barely controlled anger. "Every dimension on that part is well within specification. Let me show you the measurements." She held up her hand with an expression of patient authority, as if I was an emotional employee who needed to be calmed down before rational discussion could continue. "Jake, I understand that rejection can be frustrating, but I need you to trust my assessment of quality standards. This part doesn't meet our internal requirements, and I can't approve it for shipment." The word trust in that context was particularly galling. She was asking me to trust her judgment while she deliberately lied about the quality of my work in front of witnesses who could destroy my professional reputation. This wasn't quality control. It was public sabotage disguised as management oversight. "Show me the measurements," I demanded, reaching for the micrometer she'd used to evaluate the part. "I want to see exactly what dimensions you think are out of tolerance." Amanda stepped back slightly, maintaining her professional demeanor while creating physical distance that made me appear aggressive and confrontational. "Jake, I don't think this is the appropriate time or place for this kind of discussion. Perhaps we should schedule a private meeting to review quality procedures when you've had time to calm down." Her suggestion that I needed to calm down was the final insult in a morning full of calculated humiliation. She had provoked a confrontation by making false accusations about my work, then positioned my legitimate objection as emotional instability that required private management intervention. "There's nothing to calm down about," I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the production floor. "You're claiming this part is defective when it clearly meets every specification we've been given. I want you to show everyone exactly what problems you're seeing because I don't believe they exist." The challenge was direct and public, exactly what Amanda had been maneuvering toward. She had created a situation where I was forced to either accept her false assessment or challenge her authority in front of important clients. "Amanda," she said with the kind of disappointed patience that parents use with misbehaving children, "this behavior is completely inappropriate, especially in front of our valued clients. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from your workstation until we can discuss this matter privately." The request to step away from my workstation in front of the Meridian executives was the ultimate humiliation. She was treating me like a disruptive employee who needed to be removed from the work area for behavioral problems, creating a public spectacle that would permanently damage my reputation with our most important client. "I'm not stepping away from anything," I replied, my voice echoing across the now silent production floor.
Not until you explain exactly what problems you're seeing with this part, because everyone here deserves to know whether your quality assessments are based on actual defects or personal agenda. The accusation of personal agenda was the line Amanda had been waiting for me to cross. Her expression shifted from professional patience to genuine hurt, as if she was the victim of an unfair personal attack rather than the perpetrator of systematic workplace harassment. "Dad," she called toward the conference room, her voice carrying a note of distressed authority that suggested she was reluctantly escalating a situation that had gotten out of hand. The moment Dad emerged from the conference room with the Meridian executives behind him, I realized that Amanda had orchestrated this entire confrontation as a performance designed to destroy my credibility once and for all. She had created conditions that would force me to either accept public humiliation or challenge her authority in front of witnesses, then used my inevitable resistance as evidence that I was an uncooperative employee who couldn't work effectively under proper supervision. "What's going on here?" Dad asked, his expression
Stern in his tone, suggesting that he already had strong opinions about who was responsible for disrupting an important client visit. Amanda responded before I could explain the situation, her voice carrying the professional authority of a manager dealing with a personnel problem. "Jake is refusing to accept quality feedback on a part that doesn't meet our standards." When I attempted to explain the issues, he became confrontational and started making personal accusations about my professionalism. Her characterization of events was technically accurate, but completely misleading. She had indeed provided quality feedback, and I had indeed challenged her assessment, but she omitted the crucial detail that her feedback was based on false claims about defects that didn't exist. "The part meets every specification Meridian provided," I said, trying to maintain composure while surrounded by people who appeared to have already decided I was the problem. "Amanda is claiming it's defective, but she won't show anyone the measurements that support her assessment." Dad looked at the part in question, then at Amanda, then at me. His expression suggested that he was more concerned about the disruption to the client visit than the technical details of our disagreement. "Can we resolve this quality issue after our guests leave? This isn't the time or place for internal disputes." "There is no quality issue," I insisted, my voice rising with frustration at being dismissed without investigation. "That's the whole point. Amanda is rejecting perfectly good work for reasons that have nothing to do with actual quality problems." One of the Meridian executives stepped forward with a diplomatically concerned expression. "Perhaps we could take a look at the part in question. We're familiar with the specifications and might be able to provide some perspective on the quality assessment." His offer represented exactly the kind of objective evaluation that would expose Amanda's false claims, but she immediately moved to prevent it. "I appreciate the offer," she said with professional courtesy, "but this is really an internal process control matter. We'll resolve it according to our standard procedures and ensure that only parts meeting our enhanced quality standards are delivered." Her reference to enhanced quality standards was particularly clever because it suggested that Thompson Manufacturing was exceeding Meridian's requirements rather than failing to meet them. The implication was that my objections stemmed from resistance to higher standards rather than legitimate concerns about false quality assessments. Dad's response crushed my last hope for a fair resolution. "Jake, I think Amanda's right that this should be handled through our internal procedures. Why don't you take the rest of the morning to cool off, and we'll discuss this situation after our guests leave." Being told to cool off in front of the Meridian executives was the final humiliation in Amanda's carefully orchestrated destruction of my professional reputation. Dad had positioned me as an emotional employee who couldn't handle legitimate quality feedback, validating Amanda's characterization of events and permanently damaging my standing with our most important client. "Fine," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled rage.
but I want that part independently measured by someone who doesn't have a personal agenda. And I want the results documented so everyone can see what's really happening here. Amanda's expression showed satisfaction mixed with false concern, as if she was disappointed that the situation had escalated, but confident that proper procedures would vindicate her position. Of course, Jake. I think an independent quality assessment is an excellent idea. It will help clarify the situation for everyone involved. Her willingness to accept independent measurement should have worried me, but I was too angry to consider why she might be confident about the results. I gathered my personal tools and left the production floor, passing through a gauntlet of colleagues who looked embarrassed and uncomfortable, but were clearly unsure about what they had witnessed. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I tried to process what just happened and what it meant for my future at Thompson Manufacturing. Amanda had successfully maneuvered me into a public confrontation that made me appear to be an insubordinate employee who couldn't accept legitimate quality oversight. Even worse, she had done it in front of our most important client, ensuring that my reputation would be permanently damaged beyond repair. The most devastating aspect of the situation was how completely I had been outmaneuvered. Every move Amanda had made was defensible from a management perspective, while my responses could be characterized as emotional overreactions to reasonable quality control procedures. She had used my own professional pride and commitment to excellence against me, knowing that I would be unable to accept false accusations about the quality of my work. An hour later, Kevin Foster approached my car with an expression of concern and confusion. Jake, I don't know what's going on between you and Amanda, but that situation in there looked pretty rough. Are you okay? His genuine concern was touching, but it also highlighted how isolated I had become. Even supportive colleagues viewed what had happened as a conflict between me and Amanda, rather than systematic harassment that had culminated in a deliberately orchestrated public humiliation. I don't think I'm going to be okay, Kevin, I replied honestly. I think Amanda just destroyed my career and there's nothing I can do about it because she's made it look like quality management instead of personal vendetta. Kevin looked uncomfortable with the directness of my assessment, but he didn't disagree with it. The whole thing seemed really unfair from where I was standing. Everyone knows your work is excellent, and that part looked fine to me, but I don't know how you come back from what just happened in front of those Meridian people. His observation confirmed my worst fears about the situation. Amanda had successfully created a public spectacle that would define how everyone in the company viewed our relationship going forward. I was now the problem employee who couldn't handle quality feedback, while she was the professional manager dealing with a difficult subordinate. When I returned to the building that afternoon, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms, colleagues avoided eye contact, and there was a palpable sense that I had become someone to be cautious around. Amanda had achieved her ultimate goal, transforming me from a respected senior fabricator to a pariah whose professional competence was permanently suspect. Dad's office felt like a courtroom when I was summoned for what he called a discussion about this morning's incident. Amanda was already there, sitting calmly with a folder of documentation that I assumed contained her version of events and supporting evidence for her quality assessments. Jake, I'm very disappointed in how you handled the situation this morning. Confronting Amanda in the production area in front of our guests was completely unprofessional. And I'm concerned by your refusal to accept legitimate quality feedback.
Front of clients was completely inappropriate, regardless of any technical disagreements you might have had. His focus on my behavior rather than the validity of Amanda's quality assessment made it clear that the substance of our dispute was less important than maintaining proper workplace hierarchy. I was being disciplined for challenging authority, not for the accuracy of my position on quality standards. Dad, she was making false claims about my work in front of our most important client, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I couldn't just stand there and accept accusations that weren't based on reality. Amanda spoke up before Dad could respond, her tone carrying the patient authority of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused person. Jake, I understand that you disagree with my quality assessment, but that doesn't make it false. The independent measurement you requested confirmed that the part had dimensional issues that required correction. I stared at her in disbelief. What independent measurement? Who measured the part, and what did they find? She opened her folder and removed a measurement report with Kevin Foster's signature at the bottom. According to the document, the part I had claimed was within specification showed dimensional variations that exceeded acceptable tolerance limits by small but measurable amounts. Kevin reviewed the part using our calibrated measurement equipment, Amanda explained. His findings confirmed my original assessment that the dimensions were outside our acceptable range. The report in front of me appeared to be legitimate, complete with detailed measurements in Kevin's official signature. But I knew with absolute certainty that the part had been within specification when I measured it that morning. The only explanation was that Amanda had somehow manipulated either the part or the measurement process to produce results that supported her false claims. I want to see that part again, I demanded, and I want to be present when any additional measurements are taken. Dad's expression hardened with what appeared to be growing frustration with my continued resistance to accepting Amanda's authority. Jake, the independent measurement has been completed and the results are documented. Your insistence on questioning every aspect of Amanda's quality management is becoming disruptive to normal operations. The phrase disruptive to normal operations was the beginning of what I recognized as formal disciplinary language. Dad was building a case for whatever action he planned to take, positioning my legitimate concerns as workplace disruption that required management intervention. I'm not questioning every aspect of quality management, I protested. I'm questioning specific false claims about my work that are being used to destroy my professional reputation. Amanda's response was delivered with the kind of disappointed patience that suggested she had hoped for better from me. Jake, I think you need to step back and consider whether your emotional attachment to your work might be affecting your ability to accept constructive feedback. Quality management sometimes requires difficult conversations, but they're necessary for maintaining standards. Her characterization of systematic harassment as constructive feedback and my resistance as emotional attachment was a masterpiece of professional manipulation. She had reframed the entire situation so that my legitimate objections appeared to be personal failings that interfered with normal business operations. Dad's final decision was delivered with the formal authority of a CEO making a personnel management choice. Jake, I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a complete review of recent quality issues and workplace conduct. Amanda will document the specific concerns that need to be addressed and will schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss potential paths forward. Administrative leave was essentially suspension without pay, a disciplinary action that would be noted in my personnel file and could be used to justify termination if the review process found against me. Amanda had achieved her ultimate goal, removing me from the workplace entirely while positioning it as necessary management action rather than personal vendetta. This is exactly what she wanted, I said, looking directly at Amanda as I spoke. She's been systematically harassing me for months, creating impossible working conditions, and now she's using my reaction to those conditions as justification for getting rid of me. Dad's expression showed no sympathy for my assessment of the situation. Jake, I think you need to use this time away from work to seriously consider your attitude and approach to working relationships. When you're ready to discuss constructive solutions, we can schedule another meeting. Walking out of Thompson Manufacturing that afternoon, carrying a cardboard box with my personal tools and belongings, I understood that my 8-year career at the family business was effectively over. Amanda had successfully orchestrated my destruction using nothing but professional language, quality management procedures, and my own inability to accept false accusations about my work.
The most devastating aspect of the situation was how completely she had outplayed me at every turn. While I had been focused on defending the quality of my work and maintaining professional relationships, she had been building a systematic case that portrayed me as an uncooperative employee who couldn't function under proper supervision. That evening, sitting in my apartment with the disciplinary paperwork spread across my kitchen table, I realized that Amanda had won completely. She had destroyed my reputation, isolated me from colleagues, turned dad against me, and created official documentation that would make it nearly impossible for me to return to Thompson Manufacturing in any meaningful capacity. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that her victory would ultimately become the foundation for her own downfall. The very thoroughness of her systematic harassment had created a paper trail that would eventually expose the truth about her motivations and methods. The brother she had destroyed was about to discover resources and allies that would make her regret every moment of the campaign she had waged against him. The real story was just beginning, and Amanda had no idea what was coming next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.